Hi, Steve Hayes here, and welcome to Days Are Getting Better, episode 42. I want to talk today a bit about happiness, about emotions, and about some cool things that are coming up that you may want to see or dig into, and a few things that have happened recently that you also want to go back and check out. But let's start out with a little bit of a discussion about happiness. In an associated blog in my newsletter, uh, we talk a bit about how, while we usually focus over in the ACT space and third wave kind of areas about the importance of avoiding avoidance. Experiential avoidance is a toxic process that has been studied extensively ever since it really became a central focus. Um, I think it's fair to say, especially although it's been there for throughout the history of psychology, in the 1996 paper in JCCP on experiential avoidance that brought it into clinical paper I and my colleagues wrote. So they were coming up on 25 years ago. Uh, I think most evidence-based therapies and a lot of the traditional deeper psychotherapies have been cautious about this, but increasingly so. That running away from your own insides is a pretty sure way to develop neurobiological grooves that take you back to the thing that you're trying to run away from. So it's self defeating and often self amplifying. What has been less clear is what about the flip side of that? Is grasping after so called positive emotions just as toxic? We've written a bit about this in the associated blog, but there's also a study coming from Baljinder Sadra, the brilliant colleague of mine, a current editor of Journal Contextual Behavioral Science. And while I hope not to steal the thunder of that article, I can say that you um, need to distinguish between simply prioritizing happiness. It's not a bad thing to seek out opportunities to feel good, to connect with others, to do things that are positive for you. But there's a distinction between that uh, and being um, experientially attached to happiness. I kind of like the fact that experiential avoidance and experiential attachment have the same EA little acronym. And EA, in both of its forms, it turns out, is just as toxic. It's toxic in part, I think, because when you're attached to emotions, you can't let them vary. And when they can't vary, they no longer carry information that is accurate to you. And that's the role of emotions. We had to learn as human beings to be able even to talk about our insides. Skinner is quite right, that your inner world becomes of importance to you when it becomes of importance to the outside community. We are social primates. Language itself is social and arguably, I believe, an extension of multi-level selection linked to cooperation. Cooperation came first, an important part of relational frame theory. And I've written an article, 2014, walking through all of the evidence for that, of the three big important things that are distinct about, or at least characteristic about human beings: cooperation, culture, and cognition. Cooperation is probably the single most important because of how human beings have evolved over time. And we wouldn't have evolved these big brains and all of the costs it has in terms of energy, but also just being able to be born through birth canal. Uh, uh, Cognition, it seems unlikely that it would have come first. And it's pretty unlikely, I think, that culture came first, because where would the verbal community, back to Skinner, have come from that could have developed cognition without some evolutionary major reason for the larger groups in which cultural practices, or the intact groups at least, that which cultural practices would be advantaged. And there we are, back to cooperation. Well, let's come back to emotion. Emotional talk that comes from your insides being of interest to the social world is actually a pretty recent development. I mean, written language itself is shockingly recent. The evolution of how we even think about ourselves and the voices within, Julian Jaynes, I think, was very right, is shockingly recent. You can see it in the written record that when the oracles of Delphi were of importance, just normal people understood that you might hear things as if they are voices. And of course, there are voice hearers in my audience right now who are doing perfectly fine, thank you, and do not need to be put in a mental hospital, thank you. But emotions, when we're socialized, allow us a kind of shorthand for things that are there in our history and current circumstances, both inside and outside. It would be really hard to have a young child tell you how many minutes since they've last had food, or how many hours they've been food deprived, but they can easily say, with some training, are they hungry? Meaning, are they receptive to food? And when you grasp at emotions and try to fix them in place, you are stealing from yourself the value that they can have to you. Now that just screams in the etymology. And the blog is about happiness, but just take the etymology of happiness. You know, it comes from an old Norse word meaning good luck or chance or fortune. And it's something that you have stumbled upon. It's a hap. What happened to happen is the same etymology as happiness. So it connotes that condition of how you might feel if you happened upon something that was desirable by chance or just good fortune. And the same thing is true in so many of the emotional terms. Take something like desire. Yeah, it comes from Latin, the D part meaning from, but the desire part from sidus, a Latin word for star. So you have to imagine a time when you had to talk about longing as if looking up at the stars, and at the time, the cultural way it was being talked about at the time, as if, this unreachable thing might come from the heavens. Fear comes from a Proto-Germanic Germanic term that meant danger. And so you can easily imagine a troop or something screaming, watch out, or danger. And eventually the terms for that would enter into an emotion of fear. Grief, from an old Latin word, gravis, from which we get gravity. It means heavy. And if you've ever felt grief, you know what that's referring to. Shame, another Proto-Germanic term that meant covering oneself, hiding. And, literally like pulling something over your head, which really is a pretty good physical metaphor for shame. And people sometimes even want to, say, oh, it just makes me want to hide. Disgust. Well, the gust part is from the same root. We get gustatory. It means to taste. And dis means away. It means get that taste away. It means spitting out your food. And so imagine a time where, if in order to talk about disgust, you had to notice that people were spitting out their food. And that served the beginning of that root. The very word want, I want something, comes from an Old Norse word that means missing or lack. And so can you imagine going in and saying, I want a glass of water, when you'd go in and say, lack water? You're not talking about your insides. You're asking those around you to deliver something that's lacking. The word hope comes from a Proto-Germanic term that means to leap or spring, as if we're like jumping forward, walking along. Pretty interesting metaphor for hope. And in fact, if I use that in a blog or in a movie or in art, you might be able to get it. The word guilt comes from a Proto-Germanic term that meant a debt you owe, an obligation, something you gotta pay. And guilty as charged, and it has that kind of connotation. You now owe a debt to society or to the person that you harmed, or maybe a fine you need to pay. And so there it is, an old physical metaphor. Last one, I don't want to go on, but you can do this with almost any emotional term. Anxiety means to choke, etc. But another one that I kind of like is surprise. And it comes from super, over, and then the Latin root means to grasp. Apprehendere, I believe. It's the same thing as apprehend. And so you have to imagine that it's as if you're being grabbed from behind, surprised. Now, point of this etymology is to say that we're not so cognitively sophisticated that we have all these emotions kind of there to be discovered. No, we're constructing them socially. We can see it in the written record. Some of these things, like feeling depressed, that's only 100, 150 years old. Feeling what it feels like to be a rut in the road, a depression, like as if it's what you feel when you're pushing down other emotions. And why that matters practically in terms of these two forms of EA is that these physical metaphors point to the ever-changing history and circumstance in which you want guidance about how to deal with events. And there's so many events that can lead to emotions that we learn and we teach emotional talk, and we create them, even recently, as I mentioned, with depression, so that we can orient ourselves and others, our children, to what to do. Yeah, but if you become attached to them and try to freeze them in place, or you become avoidant of them and never have them, well, that's tantamount to saying, I don't want emotional talk to serve the function that it evolved to serve. Well, good luck with that. If you get away with it, meaning it, if you're dumb enough to actually do it, I certainly have been in my life, and I'm still learning not to be, well, then you just are less effective. You're less able to navigate life. And ironically, since we started with happiness, you're less likely to be happy, not more. And in this piece we have coming about gender is navigating through a journal with we think we have it, or revise and resubmit. We think we'll have it navigated soon. You'll be able to see a little example of that, and also how idiosyncratic, how those relationships are. At this point, I do want to speak about a couple of things that have recently happened that you might want to access. One is, or happened and are happening. We're back to it. Happenstance. The backward hap was a really cool conversation that I had with Lance McCracken, a person I have just enormous respect for, who has brought the whole psychological flexibility world into chronic pain and fundamentally changed how we think about chronic pain around the world. It was all the way back to him happening upon one of the earliest forms of what became the AAQ, Acceptance and Action Questionnaire, that had been modified by David Geiser, a student here at UNR. I was on his doctoral committee, who was dealing with CBT and ACT for pain. And he happened, Lance, on the earliest rewrite of that. We're talking about in the late 80s and early 90s, specifically to modify those items in what became the AAQ 10 years later to chronic pain. And he then carried it into pain, started researching it, and then now it just has explored almost every aspect of psychological flexibility, but not just that. He's heavily into idionomics now and modeling individually. He just published something really wonderful in a major pain journal about how individual, how idiosyncratic these life journeys are inside chronic pain. Anyway, we had a great conversation as part of the PsychFlex team, but it's available out there. And we'll put some links in the commentaries below. Conversation between myself and Chris Janssen, my partner in crime there at PsychFlex, and Lance, about chronic pain and about how to extend the model that's there of that's in chronic pain and worked out so well, such that ACT for chronic pain is on almost every list of evidence-based therapies, and really because of Lance and what he's done, plus a bunch of other people, pretty important folks in ACT land. But more than any other person singly, in terms of really bringing it into the research phase, I believe. That conversation will help you see how you can use that model to understand the role of difficult emotions and circumstances almost anywhere. And in terms of something that's upcoming, a person I have great respect for, two people I have great respect for, Rick Hansen and Diana Hill and I are doing 3 episodes, one on anxiety, one on shame, and one on anger, about how to kind of own up and show up, let go of really both forms of EA with regard to those emotions, to groove new ways of responding to them that are more positive and healthy in your life course, and to take actions that really put them into your life. And so it's a fundraiser for the GCC, for the Global Compassion Coalition, that Rick started, and other people who I have great respect for Paul Gilbert and others, the compassion-focused therapy people, and so on. It's a way of raising funds for this wonderful organization. And so look for that also in the links down below. And so I hope the Associated Blog and newsletter is useful to you. And my takeaway message, I guess, for this Days Are Getting Better episode is, let's bring the science of idionomics that is now really beginning to break through. I can feel the ground trembling. I've been through these things before. I've named the third wave, and I ain't going to say the word fourth wave. I'm just not going to do it. But boy, can I feel it. The combination of AI and longitudinal data, machine learning algorithms, and the possibility of fitting what we know now to the particular individual needs of others that I'm spending almost all my days on is beginning to really hit in our field. And given how we've stagnated in our ability to improve effect sizes in almost every area, with the one really positive exception of personalization. When you personalize, you improve. And so let's learn how to do that together. And the message to you, if you're not a researcher or a scientist, that includes personalizing your life by learning how to read and respond and make use of your particular emotions, good, bad, or indifferent, without experiential avoidance, EA, and without experiential attachment, EA. So, peace, love, and life, friends.